The padlock was already hanging open in the deputy's hand when Eleanor Reyes opened her front door at 7 in the morning. And the first thing she understood was that they meant to do it before the town was awake. Cold air came in off the porch and found the thin skin of her wrists. Two men in work coats stood beside a flatbed truck in her driveway, engine running, breath rising. A third man waited near a black sedan, parked crooked across the gravel, hands folded, smiling the way a person smiles at a funeral they are glad to attend. The notice, taped to her storm drawer, said she had until the end of the month. The calendar in her kitchen said the month had 11 days left in it. None of that mattered because the deputy was already reaching past her shoulder for the inside of the house, and the men by the truck had started walking up the steps. Eleanor was 73 years old, and she had lived in that house for 41 of those years, and she could not make her voice do anything but ask them to please wait. The deputy did not wait. He was a big man with a soft jaw and a badge that caught the gray light, and he would not look at her face. That was the detail she would remember longest. A man can do a hard thing to you and still meet your eyes. This one could not, and somewhere underneath her fear, she knew exactly what that meant. She did not know yet that a quarter-mile down the county road a man she had never met had stopped his truck on the shoulder because his dog would not settle. If this story stays with you, stay with it to the end. What happens on that porch is only where it begins. His name was Caleb Mercer, and he had been driving since before dawn, with no particular place to be, which was the only way he knew how to drive anymore. 43 years old, 6 feet, 2 inches. Of a man who had spent 20 of those years learning to make himself smaller in doorways and quieter in rooms. He had a Marine's haircut gone gray at the temples and a beard he kept short because his mother had hated beards, and she had been gone 4 years now. And keeping it short was a way of arguing with her that he could still win. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw, pale and flat, the kind that stops being a story you tell and becomes just a part of your face. His eyes did the thing. His eyes always did. They scanned. Doorways, mirrors, the tree line, the slow give of a gravel shoulder under his tires. 20 years of learning where the danger comes from does not leave a man when the uniform does. In the passenger seat sat the reason he had stopped. A German shepherd, 8 years old, tan and black, with a saddle of dark fur across his back and a black mask over his muzzle, ears up and forward and locked on something through the windshield that Caleb could not yet see. His name was Bishop. He had been Caleb's partner through 2 deployments and a long, quiet retirement that suited neither of them. And in all that time, Caleb had learned a single unbreakable rule. Bishop did not stiffen without cause. The dog was not afraid of weather or of strangers or of loud machines. He had walked calm through worse than most men ever see. So when his whole body went rigid and a low sound started in his chest, Caleb took his foot off the gas and let the truck roll to a stop. Up the road, through bare November trees, he could see a house. White clapboard, a porch with a swing, a flatbed truck in the drive with its tailgate down. He could see small figures moving on the porch. He could see a black car parked at a wrong angle. And he could see, even at that distance, the particular shape of a person standing very still in a doorway, while other people moved with purpose around her. He had seen that shape in villages on the other side of the world. It was the shape of someone watching their life get carried out the door. Bishop made the sound again. Caleb put the truck in gear and drove the quarter-mile slow. What had brought him to this county was nothing, and no one. He had buried his mother in the spring, sold the house he grew up in because he could not sleep in it, and spent the months since moving from one motel to the next, telling himself he was looking for a place and knowing he was only running from the one he had lost. He had family nowhere. He had a duffel bag, a dog, a truck, and a metal lockbox under the back seat that held the only things he had decided were worth keeping. He had no reason on earth to slow down for a stranger's bad morning. Bishop had a reason, though, and Bishop was almost never wrong. And a man who had spent his whole life learning to read a dog does not start ignoring him at 43. He parked across the road, not in the driveway. He left the engine running and the dog in the cab with the window down, because you do not walk a strange dog into a tense yard. And because Bishop, watching from the truck, saw more than Bishop in the middle of it ever could. Then he got out, and he stood by his door for a moment, and he watched the men by the truck had carried a kitchen chair onto the porch and set it on the grass. A small table came next, then a lamp with a yellow shade, the cord trailing across the steps. The old woman stood in the doorway with both hands pressed flat to her chest, not clutching, just holding herself together the way a person does when the alternative is to come apart in front of strangers. The deputy stood beside her with a clipboard, and the man from the black car had come up the walk now and was talking to her in a voice too low to carry, his hands moving in small, reasonable shapes, his smile fixed in place. Caleb crossed the road. He did not hurry. He had learned a long time ago that hurry reads as threat, and that a man who walks slow and steady into a charged space changes it just by the walking. The deputy saw him first and straightened. The two movers paused with a chest of drawers between them. The man in the overcoat turned, and his smile widened by a careful degree, and he said, "Help you with something, friend? Saw the truck?" Caleb said. "Wondered what was happening." "Lawful eviction," the man said. "Nothing to see. You can move along." Caleb looked past him to the woman in the doorway. She was looking back at him, and in her face was the thing he had come to recognize in old people who had been alone too long with a fear. She was not asking him for help. She had stopped expecting help. She was only looking at him the way you look at weather, something that had arrived and would pass, indifferent to you either way. That look did something to Caleb that the overcoat and the badge and the flatbed had not. It set his jaw. "Ma'am," he said past the man directly to her, "is this your house?" She opened her mouth, and the deputy said, "Sir, you need to step back." 41 years, the woman said. Her voice was thin, but it did not shake. "Is my house. It has been my house since 1983. The man in the overcoat turned fully toward Caleb now, and the smile had gone somewhere behind his eyes. He was perhaps 50. Well-fed, dressed in clothes that had no business in a yard this cold, a wool coat the color of charcoal, and shoes that had never seen a gravel road before that morning. "Sir," he said, pleasant as a closing door, "I am the lawful purchaser of this property, and this is a court-ordered removal, and the sheriff's office is present to enforce it. Whatever your concern, it is not your concern. Go home." "Don't have one," Caleb said. "So I've got the time." He let his eyes move once, slow, across the porch. Across the deputy's face, which still would not hold his, across the notice taped to the storm door, across the man's expensive shoes. He was not measuring them for a fight. He was reading the room, the way he had been trained to read a room. And what he read was that this was not a clean thing. Clean things do not happen at 7 in the morning before the town wakes up. Clean things do not need a deputy who cannot look at the woman he is evicting. Clean things do not make the man holding all the cards talk so fast. Across the road, in the cab of the truck, Bishop had stopped growling. He sat upright in the window, ears forward, watching Caleb the way he watched a handler about to give a command. Waiting. That was its own kind of information. The dog had decided the danger here was not the kind you bite. It was the kind you outlast. "I'd like to see the paperwork," Caleb said. The deputy stepped forward, and for the first time he raised his eyes, and what was in them was not authority. It was something closer to shame wearing authority's coat. "This is an active scene," he said. "I can arrest you for interfering." "You can," Caleb agreed, "but you'd have to write down why, and you'd have to put your name on it. And a man who will show his name on a piece of paper usually looks the person he's wronging in the eye." He let that sit. "You haven't looked at her once." The yard went quiet except for the idling engines. The mover, holding the other end of the dresser, set it down on the grass. Slow, as if afraid to make noise. The man in the overcoat looked at the deputy, and a thing passed between them that Caleb caught the edge of, a flicker of who is in charge here, and it told him more than an hour of questions would have the deputy. Was not running. This. The deputy was being run. "Get him out of here," the overcoat said, quiet, and the pleasantness was entirely gone now. The deputy did not move, and in his hesitation, Caleb saw the whole shape of it. A man who had agreed to something in a back office that he could not stomach in the daylight. A man who had taken something or been promised something and was now standing on a cold porch, discovering the price of it in the face of a stranger. "Mom," Caleb said. "Do you have anywhere to go today, my sisters?" the woman said. "In Belhaven. 2 hours. She has a spare room." A small breath. "I packed a bag. I've known for a week this was coming. I am not a fool. I just did not think it would be like this." "Like what?" "Like a theft," she said simply, "with a badge standing next to it." The word landed in the cold air and stayed there. The deputy's jaw worked. The overcoat made a small dismissive sound and checked his watch, an expensive watch, and said the mover should continue. And the movers looked at the old woman and did not move, because there are limits even for men paid by the hour. Caleb made a decision then that he could not have explained, except that Bishop had stopped him on that road and his mother had raised him to know what a theft looked like, even when it wore a coat. "I'll ask you to hold off an hour," he said to the deputy. 1 hour. If everything here is clean, an hour costs you nothing. If it isn't, you'll be glad you waited. He looked at the overcoat. "And if you've got a court order, an hour won't change it. Unless an hour is the thing you're afraid of." The man in the overcoat smiled again, but it was a different smile, the kind that has calculated something and not liked the sum. 1 hour, he said, "and then this happens whether you are standing here or not." He turned and walked back to the black sedan and got in and did not drive away, and that, too, was information. A man with nothing to hide does not sit in his car watching. Caleb walked the old woman back inside her own house. The deputy did not stop him. Bishop watched from the truck. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and old wood and something floral and faint lavender, maybe the smell of a person who had kept a home for a long time. There were photographs on every wall. A man in a younger decade's clothes laughing beside a boat. The same man, older, gray, holding a fish up to the camera with both hands. A wedding picture going sepia at the edges. Eleanor saw Caleb looking. "My husband," she said. "He has been gone 6 years. He built the back porch with his own hands. He built half this town, if you want the truth. He was a carpenter. There is not a church or a school in this county that does not have his work in it somewhere. "And the house paid for?" she said. And now something came into her voice that had not been there on the porch, a hardness that had been waiting under the fear for someone to ask the right question. "We burned the mortgage papers in the kitchen sink. Daniel cooked steaks. I am telling you, young man, we owned this house free and clear, and I have owned it. Free and clear every day since he died. And 3 months ago, a man I had never met knocked on my door and told me I owed $240,000 against it, and that I had signed for it, and that if I did not pay, he would take the house." Her hands had begun to shake now, not from cold. "I never signed anything. I never borrowed a dime. And still there is a paper somewhere with my name on it and a notary's stamp. And a judge looked at it and looked at me and believed the paper over me." Caleb stood very still. This was the thing Bishop had smelled from the road. Not violence, a lie. A patient, papered, official lie. "What's his name?" he asked. "The man in the coat." "Vance," she said. "Gregory Vance. He builds things, or he buys the land things are built on. There was a sign went up at the county meeting in the spring, a development 60 houses where the Orchard Road is now. My 5 acres are right in the middle of it." She looked at him. "I am the last one who would not sell. The Hadleys sold. The Okonkwo's sold. Old Pruitt sold and moved to his daughters. I said no. I kept saying no. And then the paper appeared. And the sheriff," her mouth pressed thin. "Vance play cards at the lodge," she said. "That is all I will say, because that is all I can prove, which is nothing. And yet, that deputy out there is Marcus Hale, and his mother went to my church for 30 years, and I held her hand when she was dying, and he knows it, and he still came up my steps this morning with a padlock. So you tell me, what is happening here, young man? Because I have stopped being able to." Caleb looked out the front window. The black sedan sat in the drive, exhaust curling. The deputy stood by the flatbed with his hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. The movers had retreated to lean against their trucks, smoking, waiting out the hour. And Bishop sat in the cab patient, watching the whole yard, having decided long ago what kind of trouble this was. "You said you never signed," Caleb said. "Did you ever fight it? In court?" "I went to the hearing," she said. "I told the judge I never signed. The judge said there was a notarized deed of trust with my signature and the witness, and that my word was not enough against a notary's seal, and that I should retain counsel. I am 73 years old, and I live on Daniel's pension and little Social Security, and I could not retain a lawyer to save my soul. I called the legal aid office in the city. They have a 6-month waiting list. The eviction was granted in 3 weeks. She sat down in a kitchen chair, suddenly, as if her legs had finished with her. So no, I did not fight it well. I did not have what fighting it takes." Caleb pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Because a man standing over a seated person is a different conversation than 2 people at a table. "Where's your deed?" he asked. "The real one. The one from 1983. The one from when you paid it off in 91. You said you burned the mortgage papers. Did you burn the deed?" She blinked at him. "The deed is at the courthouse," she said. "Recorded. That is how it works. You record the deed." "Recorded," Caleb said. "And yet do you have your own copy? The original, the one they handed you at closing with the seal and the recorder's stamp and the date?" He leaned forward. "Banks lose things. Courthouses lose things. Records get amended. The paper they hand you, though the one you fold up and put in a drawer and forget about for 40 years. And that paper does not change. If you have it, it's a photograph of the truth taken before anyone decided to lie." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood slowly and walked to a roll-top desk in the corner of the front room and pulled open a drawer that stuck and worked it free and took out a flat tin box that had once held shortbread cookies and now held the paper architecture of a marriage. Birth certificates, a discharge form, Navy, her husband's, a folded flag's worth of small official documents. And at the bottom, in a manila envelope gone soft as cloth, a deed. She brought it to the table and laid it down and did not open it, as if opening it might let the truth out before it was safe. Daniel always said, "Keep the originals," she said. He said the world runs on paper and the man who keeps the real paper wins. I thought he was being old-fashioned. Caleb opened the envelope with 2 fingers. Careful. The deed was real. Heavy paper, a county recorder's embossed seal you could feel with your thumb. A date in the corner. Wote train deed. The property described by metes and bounds, 5 acres, the names of the grantors, and the grantees, Daniel and Eleanor, husband and wife, recorded the 14th of March, 1983. And clipped behind it a second document, a release of mortgage, recorded the 2nd of August, 1991, the lien satisfied, the loan paid in full, the bank's signature and seal. He sat with it a moment. Then he did a thing he had not done in a long time, which was feel something move in his chest that was not grief. The papered lie out in that black car had a weakness, and the weakness was that it had been built on top of a truth that still existed, folded in a cookie tin kept by a dead carpenter who knew how the world ran. "This is the whole thing," Caleb said quietly. "Do you understand? This is the whole thing, a deed of trust. The thing Vance is using to evict you, it's a loan against the property. You can't take a loan against a property that's already free and clear unless you commit fraud to do it. And you can't record a fraudulent deed of trust over a paid-off property unless somebody at the courthouse either misses it or helps it along." He tapped the release of mortgage. "This says the property was clear in 91. If Vance's deed of trust is dated after that, then either you took out a new loan, which you say you didn't, and there'll be no money trail to prove you did, or somebody forged your name on a document and a notary stamped a lie." He looked up. "What's the date on Vance's deed of trust?" "I don't know," she said. "I never saw it up close. They showed it to me at the hearing from across the room." "Then that's the first thing we get," Caleb said. "It's a public record. It's at the courthouse. So is yours. And the 2 of them can't both be true." It was the first time in 3 months anyone had said "we" to her, and Eleanor put her hand over her mouth and held it there, and her eyes filled. And she did not let the tears fall, because she was a woman who had learned not to, but it was a near thing. Out in the truck, as if he had heard it, Bishop laid down across the seat, the way he did when a situation had turned from danger to work. The hour was not enough to do anything but begin. When it ran out, Caleb walked back onto the porch and found Vance already out of his car, and the deputy already holding the padlock, and the movers grinding out their cigarettes. He held up the manila envelope. Not open, just held it where the man could see it. "This is her deed," Caleb said. "Original, recorded 83. And the mortgage, release recorded 91. Free and clear." 30-some years before whatever paper you're holding, he watched Vance's face and saw for just a moment the smooth surface crack, a single instant of calculation that he did not entirely hide. "Now you can finish this eviction today. You've got the badge to do it. Only you'll be evicting a widow off a property she owns outright, and tomorrow that envelope and a reporter in the state attorney's office are all going to be looking at the same 2 pieces of paper. So the question is not whether you can do this today. The question is whether you want to be the man who did. Vance recovered fast. He had not gotten where he was by panicking. That document, he said, proves a deed in 1983. It does not prove what happened since people refinance. People take equity loans, old women forget what they sign. He smiled at Eleanor, and it was an ugly thing to watch. Your signature is on a deed of trust, Mrs. Reyes. Notarized, witnessed a judge, agreed one. Yellowed piece of paper from 40 years ago does not undo a court order. He turned to the deputy. Proceed. And the deputy looked at the padlock in his hand, and looked at the old woman, and looked at Caleb, and at the envelope, and a war went across his soft face that took only 2 seconds, and felt much longer. I'm going to call this in, Deputy Hale said. I want it on record that there's a competing deed claim before I lock anybody out of anywhere. You'll do no such thing, Vance said. I'll do exactly that, the deputy said, and his voice had found something in the last hour that it had not had at 7 a.m. Because if this goes the way I'm starting to think it goes, I am not putting my name on it alone. He looked at Caleb. An hour. I need an hour to reach the duty magistrate. Can you keep her calm and keep him? Nodded Vance. Off this porch. I can do that, Caleb said. You are making a serious mistake, Vance said to the deputy, and there was no charm left in it at all now. Only the cold of a man whose timeline had slipped. I've been making it since I took your friend's money, the deputy said so quietly. Only Caleb and Vance could hear it, and then he turned and walked to his cruiser. And that sentence, that admission, was the first crack in the whole edifice. The hour stretched into the morning, the town woke up, and a thing began to happen on that gravel road that Vance had not planned for and could not stop, because it ran on something his paper could not touch. A pickup slowed on the road, and a man leaned out and called, Eleanor, that you on the porch? What's the truck for? And when she told him, the man parked. Then a woman from the next farm over came walking up with a thermos, because she had seen the flatbed and feared the worst. Then the man who ran the feed store, who had known Daniel 40 years, drove out on his lunch and stayed. By noon there were 9 vehicles on the shoulder of that road, and a dozen people standing in Eleanor's yard, and none of them were doing anything but standing there. And that was the point. Vance could evict one widow at dawn. He could not evict a town at noon. Caleb watched them gather and felt the old ache turn over in him, the one he had been driving away from for 4 years. These were the people his mother had been. These were the porches he had grown up on and spent 20 years learning to live without. He had told himself he had no home and no family and nowhere to be, and here he was on a stranger's lawn, watching strangers become something else just by refusing to leave. And Bishop was out of the truck now, leashed to the porch rail, lying in the middle of it all with his head on his paws, calm as Sunday. Because the dog had known from the road that this was where they were supposed to stop. The deputy came back from his cruiser with a different posture. Magistrates ordered a stay, he said, loud enough for the yard to hear. 48 hours. Nobody locks anything. Nobody moves anything. There's a competing claim of clear title, and it has to be reviewed before the removal goes forward. He looked at Vance. You can take that up with the court Monday. Vance stood in the cold yard, with a dozen townspeople looking at him, and he did the thing. The profile of men like him always do the thing that told Caleb they would win. He smiled and shrugged, and said it was all a misunderstanding that the court would clear up, and he got in his black sedan and he drove away. He did not fight on that lawn. Men like Vance never fight where they can be seen. They go back to the rooms where the paper lives, and they fix the paper, and they come back when the witnesses have gone home. which is exactly why the next 48 hours mattered more than the morning had. Caleb did not sleep that night. He sat instead at Eleanor's kitchen table with her late husband's reading lamp and the cookie tin and a legal pad, and he built the thing he knew how to build, which was a case made of evidence laid in order so that no single piece could be pulled out to make the rest fall. He was not a lawyer. He had never been a lawyer. 20 years of military life, though, had taught him how an investigation is assembled, how you establish a timeline, how you find the document that the lie depends on, and pull it into the light. Eleanor made coffee at 2 in the morning and again at 4, and told him about Daniel and about the Orchard Road, and about the county meeting in the spring where Vance had stood up in a good suit and shown a map of 60 houses and called it progress, and about how the votes to no one's surprise had gone his way. In the gray before dawn, with Bishop asleep against the back door, Caleb laid out what he had. Eleanor's recorded deed, 83. The recorded mortgage release, 91. And the thing he needed and did not yet have, the date and the details of the deed of trust. Vance was using the forged one because everything turned on it. If it was dated after 91, and Eleanor could show no loan proceeds had ever come to her, no money in any account, no payments ever made or missed, then the document was an orphan, a lien with no loan behind it, and a lien with no loan behind it is not a contract. It is a forgery, wearing a contract's clothes. The courthouse opened at 8. Caleb was on the steps at 7:45 with Eleanor beside him in her church coat, and the deputy, Hale, came up the steps a minute later in plain clothes, off duty, which told Caleb the man had crossed a line in his own mind sometime in the night and was not going back. "I pulled the file myself this morning before my shift," Hale said low. "I'm not supposed to. I did anyway." He handed Caleb a folder. "Deed of trust," Vance recorded. "Look at the date." Caleb opened it. The deed of trust securing $240,000 against Eleanor's property was dated the 9th of February of that year, 11 months ago, 29 years after the mortgage release. It bore Eleanor's signature, or a thing shaped like it, and a notary's stamp, and the notary's name was printed below the seal. "I never signed that," Eleanor said, staring at it. "That is not even how I make my R. Look at the R. Daniel always teased me about my R. It has that loop, and that one has no loop." "We don't have to prove it's not your signature," Caleb said. "Not first. First, we prove there's no loan behind it. A loan that size, $240,000. That money went somewhere. It got wired to an account or cut as a check, or it never existed at all. If it never existed, there was no loan, and a deed of trust securing a loan that was never made is fraud on its face. So we follow the money, and the money won't be there because they never made one. They just needed a lien to foreclose on, and they manufactured one." He looked at the notary's name on the stamp, Patricia Lendl, "and then we find her. Because a notary stamped a signing that never happened, and a notary keeps a journal by law, and her journal will either have an entry for that day, which is a lie we can break, or it won't, which is a crime we can prove. It took the whole 48 hours, and then it took 11 days more. But it broke the way Caleb had said it would break, one piece at a time, in the order he had laid them. The money was the first wall to fall. Eleanor's bank, with her standing right there authorizing it, confirmed in writing that no deposit of $240,000, or any sum near it, had entered any account of hers in February, or any other month. No loan proceeds, no wire, no check. The lender, named on the deed of trust, was a limited liability company registered 8 months before the loan and dissolved 4 months after, an entity that had existed exactly long enough to lend money it never lent and then vanish. Caleb did not have to be a lawyer to read that. A company born to hold one fraudulent lien and then die. The notary was the second wall. Patricia Lendl was a real woman, 60 years old, who had notarized documents at a title company for 2 decades and who, it turned out, had retired the previous summer and moved to be near her grandchildren, and who was deeply, visibly shaken to be shown a deed of trust bearing her seal, because on the 9th of February she had been 400 miles away at a granddaughter's birthday, and she had the photographs and the airline record to prove it, and she had never in her life met the widow. Her stamp had been used after she stopped using it. Someone had her old seal, or a copy of it, and had pressed it onto a lie. When the investigator from the state attorney's office, who by then had become very interested, asked her who had access to her seal when she left the title company, she gave a name. The name was a man who still worked there. And the title company, it would emerge, did a great deal of business closing land deals for a developer named Gregory Vance. The deputy was the third wall, and the hardest, and the one Caleb respected most, because Marcus Hale did the thing almost no one does. He told the truth about himself. He went to the state attorney's office on his own, without a deal, without a lawyer, and he said that 2 months before the eviction, Sheriff Dolan had told him this one was already handled at the top and to just run the paper and not ask questions, and that an envelope of cash had been left in his cruiser that he had not returned, which he would carry the rest of his life, and that he had stood on that porch at 7 in the morning, knowing in his gut it was wrong, and had done it anyway, until a stranger and a dog stopped on the road. He named the sheriff. He named the dates. He gave back the money he had not spent, and he turned in his badge before they could ask for it. And Caleb, who had seen men do brave things under fire, thought that was as brave a thing as he had watched a man do, because there was no medal in it and no glory and no way for it to make Hale's life anything but harder. It did not happen on a courthouse lawn with a smile and a shrug. It happened the way real justice happens, slowly in offices, on paper. The lie pulled apart one document at a time until there was nothing holding it up. The state attorney filed charges. The forged deed of trust was voided. The phantom company was exposed. The sheriff, Dolan, resigned before the recall petition that the town was already circulating could reach a vote and faced charges of his own. And Gregory Vance, who had built his career on the gap between what is legal and what is right, and on the certainty that an old woman alone could not fight him, discovered that an old woman with the original deed, a stubborn Marine, an honest broken deputy, and a town that would not go home was a different equation entirely. He did not go to the porch again. Men like him never do. He went in the end the way the profile said he would go, not in handcuffs, in a dramatic scene, but quietly, through his lawyers, into a settlement and a guilty plea on the fraud counts to avoid the worse ones, his development dead, his name in the regional paper, his smooth surface finally cracked all the way through. The 60 houses where the Orchard Road runs were never built. The land is still orchard. In the spring it is white with blossom, and Eleanor Reyes can see it from her back porch, the one her husband built with his own hands. She kept the house. The court restored clear title within the month. The fraudulent lien struck from the record as if it had never been, which, in truth, it never had. The day the letter came confirming it, Eleanor walked out to the road where Caleb had first stopped his truck, and she stood on the gravel shoulder, and she looked back at her own house the way she had looked at it that first morning through the eyes of a stranger, and this time it was hers, fully and finally and without a shadow on it, and she let the tears come that she had held back on the porch alone, with no one to see, which is how a proud person finally lets go. Caleb did not leave. That was the thing he could not have predicted about himself, standing by his truck that first cold morning, with no home and no family and nowhere to be. He had meant to stay until it was settled and then drive on, the way he always drove on. The days became weeks instead, and Eleanor's back fence needed mending, and her gutters were full, and the feed store man knew a fellow looking for a hand who was good with his tools, and Bishop had taken to sleeping on the porch Daniel built as if he had always slept there. One evening, Eleanor set a third place at her table without asking, and Caleb sat down at it without comment. And that was the whole conversation, and it said everything. He rented the small house at the end of the orchard road, the one old Pruitt had left empty, and he fixed it up through the winter, and Bishop ran the fence line in the mornings. And on Sundays, Caleb drove Eleanor to the church. Her husband had helped build, and sat in the back, and was, after a while, simply one of the people there. The town that had stood in her yard, refusing to leave, folded him in the same way it had folded itself around her, without ceremony, way a community absorbs the people who turn out to be theirs. Marcus Hale, who lost his badge and gained his self-respect, took work at the feed store and became in time a man people trusted again, which he had thought was gone forever, and was not. Because a town that watches a man tell the truth about his own failure learns it can forgive him. And so, slowly, can he. There is a thing that happens to a man who has spent years believing he has nothing left to protect. He stops scanning the tree line for threats and starts watching the road for friends. Caleb Mercer had driven half the country running from a house he could not save, and he stopped on a gravel shoulder for a stranger's bad morning because his dog would not settle. And in saving her house, he found the thing he had stopped believing he was allowed to have. Not a place to hide, a place to stay. Now, the deed in the cookie tin had been a photograph of the truth, kept safe by a man who knew how the world runs, and the truth it photographed turned out to be larger than 5 acres and a white clapboard house. It was that goodness, when it keeps its papers in order and refuses to go home, can still beat the men who think a smile and a stamp can steal whatever they want. If you have ever felt that the people with the badges and the paperwork always win, that the quiet and the old and the alone are simply there to be taken from, hold on to this. The widow had the deed. The Marine had the patience. The deputy found his courage late, but he found it. And a whole town remembered that. Standing still in someone's yard refusing to leave is its own kind of strength. You do not have to be mighty to be unmovable. You only have to be right, and to keep your papers and to refuse to go home. On a warm evening that first spring, with the orchard in white blossom across the road, and the light going gold over the fence Daniel built and Caleb mended, Eleanor sat on the back porch with a glass of tea, and Caleb sat on the step below her, and Bishop lay between them with his head on Caleb's boot, and none of them said anything for a long while, because there was nothing left that needed saying. The house stood whole behind them. The orchard would not be 60 houses. The truth had kept the way Daniel always said it would. And a man who had spent 4 years certain he would never have a porch to sit on again sat on one with an old woman who had become family and a dog who had known the way before either of them, and felt at last like a person who had arrived somewhere instead of a person passing through. May God keep you and the ones you love. May your papers be in order, and your neighbors be the kind who will not go home. And may you find, as that Marine found, on a cold gravel road, that the place you were running from and the place you were looking for are sometimes, if you are willing to stop, the very same porch.